Today was my wedding day. Today I would marry Evelyn. I first met Evelyn in high school. Her beauty was ethereal. Those startling blue eyes like chips of summer sky held a depth that seemed to peek into your soul. Her voice, a gentle melody, held the power to soothe a thunderstorm. From the moment we met, I was hers. Every stolen glance, every whispered conversation fueled a love story straight out of a romance novel. We shared secrets under the shade of old oak trees, dreams scribbled on worn notebooks. After college, with diplomas clutched in sweaty hands and futures shimmering before us, I got down on one knee and presented Evelyn with a ring as simple and elegant as she was. But lately, a discordant note had begun to play in our perfect symphony. It started subtly, restless nights where she'd toss and turn, muttering unintelligible phrases in a language that chilled me to the bone. Sometimes, a scream would rip through the stillness of the night, a raw, primal sound that sent shivers down my spine. I'd reach out to comfort her, but she'd flinch away, eyes filled with a terror I couldn't fathom. My Evelyn, the woman whose laughter used to chase away the shadows, seemed possessed by a darkness growing within her. Despite the fear gnawing at me, my love for Evelyn never wavered. It was a fierce flame, burning even brighter in the face of this unknown horror. I refused to let this darkness consume her, consume us. With a desperation born of love and a growing sense of dread, I sought help from the most unorthodox source, Father Ramirez, the old priest at San Antonio's dilapidated church, a man whispered about with a mixture of reverence and fear. Father Ramirez, hunched and wizened, listened patiently to my tale. When I finished, he steepled his gnarled fingers and looked at me with eyes that seemed to hold the weight of centuries. There are forces at work, young Mark, forces beyond our comprehension. But there is still hope, an ancient rite, one that could banish the darkness within your beloved. He explained a ritual, an exorcism, performed at the peak of the wedding ceremony. Fear coiled in my stomach, but the thought of losing Evelyn spurred me on. We devised a plan, a desperate gamble that felt like the only chance we had. Today, as I stood at the altar, the weight of the secret plan pressed down on me. Evelyn was late. The guests, a mixture of curious townsfolk and concerned family, murmured amongst themselves. The worry gnawed at me. But then, the heavy oak doors at the back of the church creaked open. My heart lurched. There she was, Evelyn, her white lace gown a stark contrast to the dark wood paneling. The sunlight filtering in through a stained glass window cast a crown of vibrant colors on her head. But something was terribly wrong. Her walk down the aisle wasn't the graceful glide I had dreamt of. It was a shambling gait, her head tilted at an unnatural angle. Her captivating blue eyes were vacant, replaced by swirling pools of bottomless black. A low, guttural growl emanated from her throat, sending a wave of terror through the congregation. Gasps and whispers filled the air, a sharp counterpoint to the solemn music. The priest, his weathered face grim, nodded at me. This was it. My palms turned slick with sweat. We'd planned on pinning her down discreetly during the vows, but with everyone watching, subtlety had flown out the window. I signaled to the 4 burly men seated in the front row, my childhood friends sworn to secrecy. They understood the urgency in my single, frantic nod. With a speed born of desperation, they surged forward, their large hands grabbing Evelyn's arms and legs. A shriek, a sound that ripped through the sanctity of the church, tore from her throat. Her body contorted, a grotesque spectacle of unnatural strength. My friends, though strong, faltered under the unexpected force. For a moment, chaos reigned. Then I remembered Father Ramirez's instructions. The crucifix, Mark. Hold it near her, force it into her sight. I lunged for the priest's hand, snatched the crucifix, and with a surge of adrenaline, thrust it towards Evelyn's face. For the first time since she entered the church, a flicker of recognition crossed her vacant eyes. But it wasn't the sweet, loving Evelyn I knew. It was a flicker of pure, primal rage. She hissed, the sound like a serpent coiling, and lunged at me. I stumbled back, the crucifix falling from my grasp. My friends, momentarily stunned, regrouped and managed to overpower her, pinning her to the floor. The struggle was horrendous. Evelyn screamed, a sound that shook the very rafters of the church, words spilling from her lips, but not human words. They were a cacophony of guttural growls and clicks, a language from a nightmare. Father Ramirez, his voice hoarse, began the exorcism rite. He spoke in Latin, his voice trembling slightly despite years of experience. The air in the church grew thick with an oppressive energy. The candles flickered wildly, casting grotesque shadows on the walls. Suddenly, the church plunged into darkness. A shriek that ripped through the silence confirmed my worst fear. Evelyn had broken free. Panic gripped the congregation, a wave of hysteria crashing through the previously hushed silence. Then, a faint blue light emanated from the priest's hands. He'd clutched a vial filled with a glowing liquid, the final ingredient of the ritual. He chanted louder, his voice laced with a newfound determination. The light intensified, battling against the darkness that seemed to emanate from Evelyn. In the eerie blue light, I saw a horrifying transformation. Evelyn's flawless skin became mottled, her eyes burning with an unnatural yellow glow. Talons sprouted from her once manicured fingers. She was no longer the woman I loved, but a monstrous entity trapped within her mortal shell. The battle raged on. The priest stumbled, the strain evident on his weathered face. The blue light flickered, threatened to extinguish. Just as despair threatened to consume me, I remembered the words Father Ramirez had spoken. The power of faith could bolster the right. With a strength born of desperation, I focused on my love for Evelyn, picturing every happy memory we shared. I shouted out words of encouragement, a desperate plea to the woman I loved, the woman still trapped within that monstrous entity. The effect was immediate. The blue light flared, pushing back the darkness. Evelyn's screams turned into anguished cries, the monster fighting a losing battle against the resurgence of her humanity. With a final, earth-shattering roar, the darkness receded. The blue light enveloped Evelyn, and then, with a blinding flash, it was gone. Silence. Thick, heavy silence filled the air. Light flickered back on, revealing a scene of utter devastation. Pews were overturned, candles lay scattered on the floor. The once pristine white walls were now spattered with something dark and viscous. In the center of the chaos lay Evelyn, her body limp, her eyes closed. Her face, pale and drawn, bore the marks of the ordeal. I rushed to her side, fear and relief warring within me. Her chest rose and fell with shallow breaths. She was alive. She was back. The priest, drained but triumphant, approached us. A tired smile creased his lips. "It is done, my son. Your love has saved her." Tears welled up in my eyes. I cradled Evelyn's hand in mine, whispering reassurances until she fluttered open her eyes. They were still a little cloudy, but the familiar blue spark was back. Relief flooded through me, so intense it almost hurt. But as Evelyn looked at me, a flicker of fear crossed her face. "Mark," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "Where are we?" There was a question in her voice, a subtle confusion that chilled me to the bone. "Don't you remember, Evelyn?" I asked, my voice barely a croak. "Today is our wedding day." She frowned, staring at the ruined altar, the overturned chairs, the terrified faces of the congregation. A flicker of recognition dawned in her eyes, but it was quickly replaced by a look of utter horror. "Wedding day," she breathed, a single tear rolling down her cheek. But that was yesterday." My blood ran cold. "Yesterday?" The whispers started, a low murmur that grew into a cacophony. People were pointing at the calendar hanging on the wall by the church door. It wasn't the day I remembered. It was a date a full year later. A horrifying realization dawned on me. The entity, whatever it was, hadn't simply possessed Evelyn. It had replaced her. The woman in my arms, the woman who looked like Evelyn, wasn't her. The real Evelyn, the one filled with love and laughter, was gone, replaced by who knows what, a monster masquerading in her skin. I looked at the Evelyn in my arms, her eyes wide with manufactured confusion. A single, chilling sentence escaped my lips. "Who are you?" The Evelyn smiled, a slow, unnerving smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Why, Mark?" she purred, her voice a sickeningly sweet parody of Evelyn's. "I'm your wife." The blue light from the exorcism flickered faintly on her outstretched hand, a single talon glinting in the dim light. Panic clawed at my throat. The battle wasn't over. It had just begun.